Hello and welcome to this Hoop Collective YouTube special looking at the NBA draft, which is coming up on the 23rd. Is it the 23rd? I'm not sure. That sounds right. The 23rd from New York. Joining us from New York is Tim Bontemps.
Well, Brian, I thought you were going to say the NFL draft for a second. It looked like you started to hesitate when you said "and."
I'm a huge football fan.
Huge.
Joining us from Dallas, Texas is Ban MacMahon.
Howdy, partners.
MacMahon, are you going to Houston for the draft?
I am not. I volunteered to head to either Houston or OKC and was told that sitting right in Dallas is fine. I think the Mavericks are going to have fajitas again. No picks, but the fajitas will be there. So I'll be at the Mavs place.
Sounds perfect.
I'll see whoever the Rockets and Thunder draft for you in New York. I'll give them a wave for you.
There you go. Say howdy for me.
Well, let's start by talking about the top of the draft. So Jonathan Givony, our draft expert at ESPN, came out with his newest mock draft today, and he has Jabari Smith at the top, as he's had for the last couple of mock drafts, going to the Orlando Magic. Everybody I've talked to in the league believes that. The Magic have gone to some length to cloud their movements. They brought in a whole bunch of different prospects. And something interesting has happened in the last 24 hours. Now, I trust my information. I trust our information men like Givony, like Woj, like Zach Lowe. And nobody has information. It doesn't mean that we have it all, but nobody has information about this changing. But the casinos, the sports books have dramatically lowered the odds of Paolo Banchero moving into number one position. He has now got the second highest odds. I think his odds have come down from plus 1,600 to around plus 250 or plus 300. I don't know what to make of this. I think it's going to be Jabari. He's a dynamic shooter, would fit well to any roster, but fits well with what the Magic have on their roster. MacMahon, Banchero has been attached to the Rockets. So at the 3 pick. So what do we make of this late move that the casinos seem to be onto something, or at least the sharp money seems to be heading on Paolo to go 1, and it's changing the odds?
I don't know. Is it just the casinos generating action? I don't know. It's not like Banchero has, the Magic have not had him in for a workout as far as I know to this point. He did work out for the Rockets. But it would be surprising to me. I think the top 3 are, I don't want to say etched in stone, but it would be a surprise if it's not Jabari Smith to Orlando, Chet Holmgren to OKC, and Paolo Banchero to the Rockets. Now, I've heard or I've read about the Rockets maybe being enough in love with Banchero to where they would trade up. That would shock me. I was in Houston last week. I've talked to all the powers that be in Houston, from Tillman Fertitta on down. Tillman kind enough to give me a call from his yacht overlooking the Tower Bridge in London. But basically the way they look at this is, hey, they've got the number 3 pick. There are 3 guys that they consider stars in this draft, and they'll take whoever's left.
Remember when Jerry Jones, when the one NFL draft was virtual, Jerry Jones did it from his yacht, wherever it was in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
Will Tillman do the draft from his yacht?
No. Tillman and his son Patrick were coming on back home. Tillman, he's not that hands-on. Patrick is. They were coming back, and obviously with the Rockets, it's not just about number 3. They have 17. They have 26 now.
Right.
So they could be involved in a lot of action, certainly later in the first round as well.
So Bontemps, Oklahoma City keeps their information pretty tight. Givony and others have Holmgren assigned at 2. How sure are we that the Thunder are going with Chet Holmgren?
Like you said, the Thunder don't exactly share information, so it's hard to know for sure. However, I think if you look at the way the Thunder have approached this rebuild that they're in, and swinging for the fences on toolsy guys that can do a lot of different things and have high basketball IQ, to me, Chet Holmgren is the perfect fit for what they need and what they're trying to do. And I'd be pretty stunned, assuming he's sitting there, if they don't pick him, no matter what Orlando does with the first pick. I mean, to me, Chet Holmgren reminds me a lot of a guy Sam Presti has liked for a long time, which is Al Horford. And I think if you look at what his profile is as a player, he's probably not going to do anything that completely jumps off the page. Like, he's not going to score 30 points a game. He might block shots at a really high level, but he's just really good at a lot of different stuff. He's a really smart defensive player. He's a really good passer. He can handle the ball despite the fact that he's 7'2", 7'3". He can score 15 a game. Like, Al Horford throughout his career has averaged 15 and 7, 3 or 4 assists, block or 2 a game. Really solid, fills in all the gaps. He was the third pick in the draft. If you get Al Horford with the second or third pick in the draft, you get his career, you're going to feel really good. And with the Thunder team where you've got Josh Giddey and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Lou Dort and a lot of perimeter talent, what they don't have is interior talent. And obviously, you probably need to get a center still to play with Chet Holmgren. Maybe at 12, you could get a guy like Mark Williams from Duke, pair him with them, and then all of a sudden maybe you've got a completely different looking team. But to me, Holmgren is the best in terms of upside, the highest upside guy of these guys overall. And I think if he's sitting there at 2, it makes all sense in the world for the Thunder to take him.
Yeah, I mean, in the old days, teams would sort of draft players and then raffle them off. That hasn't really happened in the modern era. I think the last time I saw this that I can remember was Sam Hinkie getting inside information that the Orlando Magic were high on Elfrid Payton. How many years ago was that? 6 or 7 years ago. And he took him 2 picks ahead and then held him for ransom. If you were 100% convinced that the Rockets, who have extra picks and you have some, you own some of their picks going forward, if you were 100% convinced that the Rockets were in love with Banchero, you could take him and then hold him for ransom. But that doesn't happen in the modern.
The Thunder
era.
also have a trillion picks. They need to just get the guy.
I will say this. The Thunder, there's been some interest in some rumblings about them trying to move up from 12. Number 12 is the second pick. It's the Clippers pick. It's one of the assets they got from Paul George trade. They have so many picks in their arsenal. It wouldn't surprise. I'm sure they've already called, but it wouldn't surprise me if they offer some of those picks in addition to 12 to try to move up. And even if it's not for a center, if it's for one of the desirable young wing players that are going to come after this top 3.
Sure.
Although last year they did the opposite and they gave up a pick, which ended up being Alperen Şengün, to get 2 future first rounders. They were like, no, we don't have enough picks yet. Let's add to that stockpile.
Right. And Şengün has a real promise, as very promising as a big, and maybe they would want him. Although the guy they ended up taking, Trey Mann, had a good last quarter of the season. So,
with the Thunder, the one thing I've heard was that they might really be high on Jaden Ivey. To take him at 2, though, that is there a chance they could move down? I don't know if there's something there. And you hear so much right now. You don't know what's real, what's speculation, what's smoke. But to me, Holmgren he's certainly the most fascinating prospect in this draft. And I feel like if Holmgren weighed 220, then there would be no question.
He'd be the number 1 pick. For
There'd
sure.
be no
question.
And honestly, probably would be the number 1 pick if somebody else got it. As far as Banchero versus Holmgren, my sense was the Rockets, they need to make that determination just in case, but I did not get the feeling that they had when I went through there last week. But Holmgren, he's so fast. And you mentioned Al Horford. I think that's an interesting comp. This one, you're really going to have to put physiques aside, but an interesting comp that I've heard for him is another guy who's in those finals, and that's Draymond Green. Now, obviously, you're talking about a skinny 7'2" guy, or rail thin 7'2" guy versus a pretty stocky 6'6" or whatever Draymond is. But the executive I was talking to came up with this comp. He said the one question aside from physique, and that leads to durability, you don't know. But the one question about Holmgren is, will he ever be a primary scorer? Is he going to be a guy who is going to be able to get you 20 plus points per game, that you're going to be able to run offense, do so on and so forth. And so that they didn't know, but they said, look, this guy is going to be able to impact games as a dominant defensive presence with, both obviously a freakish wingspan, intelligence, instincts, toughness. Despite his frame, nobody ever questions his toughness. And then offensively, they felt like his intelligence, his instincts, his passing ability, in the same way that Draymond, when things are going well, is able to impact games that way. So again, completely different physiques, but they felt like kind of the floor for this guy would be that sort of at least an extremely high level role player. And then I talked to somebody in Holmgren's camp who said, well, I like that comp, but we also think he's got some Brandon Ingram in terms of they do think he'll have the ability. Yeah, they do think he'll have the ability to put the ball on the floor and create. The Draymond comp, when I've kind of put that to other people, they're like, okay, I can, folks can see that the Ingram one, I've not been met with as much optimism on.
Yeah, I think to your point, the question I would have with him, it goes back to whether he's going to be a guy that can score 25 a game, right? Which is why, to me, guys like Horford and Draymond are sort of how I look at with him, where he is probably not going to do that, but he's going to do so many other things to impact winning. And to your point about Jaden Ivey, the one thing people should remember with the Thunder, last year they had the 6th pick. They took Josh Giddey, the Australian guard, and the Warriors were really interested in Josh Giddey by all accounts. They had a ton of people to see him. I'm pretty sure at the game you're at, Brian, in Las Vegas, and a lot of people thought he was going 7, and nobody knew what the Thunder were going to do. And people sort of thought they might take Jonathan Kuminga, and they ended up taking Josh Giddey with that pick. So, there's certainly, when it comes to Oklahoma City, they don't let information get out. There's going to be a lot of guesswork on what they decide to do. But I think when you look at just the overall toolbox that Holmgren has and what they're doing in terms of shooting for upside, he's got the highest upside. I just would be very surprised they go with anybody else.
The Raptors had a lot of people looking at Josh Giddey too, and they took Scotty Barnes. Ended up being a good pick. One more comp before we move on. Remember, the Thunder 2 years ago did take Alexei Pashevsky. They moved up for him, right? Wasn't it about the 16th? Wasn't it about the 16th pick? They traded up to get him. Yep. He's 7 foot, and I don't know what he is now, but when they drafted him, he weighed 190.
Yeah.
So they were not afraid of a multi-tooled, tall, but skinny player. And, his development has been okay. He's had some moments, but so I think whatever that's worth.
His best moments, though, was in that regular season finale a couple years ago. They were desperately trying to lose, and he was playing point guard.
And they won. So this draft is really going to get interesting at the 4th pick.
Before we move on, Brian, I would like to hear Tim talk a little bit about Banchero in terms of what he thinks the fit will be like, assuming it goes that way with Houston.
I need to get Bontemps a pronunciation guide.
Banchero, sorry.
Banchero. There we go. Yeah, I mean, look, Rafael Stone, the Rockets GM, has made no bones about, like, he's going to swing for upside. He like last year, Jalen Green, Evan Mobley, he felt like the ceiling was higher for Jalen Green, so they went with Green. And rocky rookie year, strong finish. They're really happy with his development. And Banchero, the upside is high, and he might be. He probably is the most ready to be a primary offensive guy coming in.
He's going to be my rookie of the year pick next year.
Yeah, and if he ends up in Houston,
you've already decided that who your rookie of the year pick is going to be.
If he ends up with the Rockets, he's going to have the ball in his hands all the time. And to Tim's point, he's going to score a ton of points and get a bunch of rebounds and a bunch of assists.
We haven't seen the draft. We haven't seen Summer League. We haven't seen preseason. And you've already made your pick.
Listen, you are prediction averse. Bontemps makes them well in advance. But so, he's a guy who they think, listen, he might be a perennial all-star, 25 plus point per game, maybe a less athletic, better shooting version of young Blake Griffin, I guess would be a comp, a guy who 6'10", can put it on the floor, can score, can
We've heard some
can
Ben Simmons comps too, in terms of like obviously not the defensive player, but similar kind of offensive game. Like, can do it all.
That's what
with
I
the ball
want
and
is
his big
Ben
6'10"
Simmons
guy.
offensive comps. That's who I'd pick. If I could do it.
Well, he's a 6'10" guy who can run point. I mean, he's a better shooter than Ben. It's hard not to be. But
also Ben Simmons did win Rookie of the Year.
yes, he did.
He with
In
a
his
question
second
mark
year,
if you ask
I would point out,
Donovan
yeah.
Mitchell and those folks.
Yes.
But so the questions with Banchero is, okay, yes, everybody I've talked to agrees he can definitely be a primary scorer. Can he be an efficient primary scorer? Can
he guard anyone?
And then defensively, can he be, I don't even know if can he be like a plus defender, but can he be a part of a defense, a quality defense, the kind of defense you need to be, perennial playoff team contender, which obviously they're trying to build there. And so, I've seen people say, oh, well, Banchero came in for a visit and then they traded Christian Wood. That timing's coincidental. When they traded Christian Wood, when somebody offered a pick.
Second they could trade him. Yes.
Yes. They tried to trade him before a deadline. Nobody offered a pick. They did not have any picks. And I mean, they didn't have a second round pick. They had no picks on the table. The Mavericks came up with a deal that I think does make sense for both sides. They gave up the number 26 pick. They were able to clear out several roster spots. And for the Mavericks, you get a kind of a high upside swing on Wood. They needed more scoring. They needed to upgrade at the center spot. He does those. And if it works, great. If not, it'll be a temporary situation. For the Rockets, having 26, soon to be 27-year-old Christian Wood on a roster that's rebuilding, that's likely to be a bottom three team again this year, makes no sense.
We heard about Eric Gordon's at the trade deadline. They ended up not doing it. They stuck to their guns, whatever they wanted. There's been some rumors about some teams interested in Eric Gordon. I've heard Philadelphia. I've heard Phoenix. Philadelphia, I heard offered something around the 23rd pick, which they retained when Brooklyn didn't trigger it as part of the Simmons trade. But I heard, Houston's not really interested in another pick in this draft.
Well,
they've got 3. They don't want 4.
Yeah, Houston, they are absolutely certain that they can get a first round pick for Eric Gordon. Matter of fact, that I've got information, they have choices on the table right now. Now, to your point, perhaps they would prefer that to be a future first round or whatever. And they value Gordon as a role model, kind of his professionalism. And plus he's a guy who spaces the floor, doesn't need the ball in his hands a lot, but he's also a guy who can help a bunch of playoff teams. Shot at 41% from 3 last year, can still guard. You don't need to
good
run
contract.
stuff for him.
He's got 2 years left. 1 year's a team option. It's not fully guaranteed.
Yes. And so
if he doesn't,
and I talked to Gordon when I was down in Houston, and essentially he said, hey, like they could guarantee his $20.9 million salary next season. I think bare minimum, if he's on the roster, he wants that to happen. He told me, he likes being in Houston. He's happy there, but he said, we'll see what kind of commitment the Rockets really want to give me. It's up to them. We'll see what happens this summer. He's not extension eligible until
I love, by the way, how
3rd.
all these guys, we rarely saw guys in the middle of contracts get extensions, like even as recently as 3 years ago. And now everybody wants extensions.
Yeah.
I was just talking to an agent the other day. I won't say what player, but there was a player who's after his prime and is still getting paid in his prime and might get traded.
Yeah.
I know, I'm sorry to be vague, but and the agent was like, well, I hope if he gets traded, his new team is ready to extend him. And I was like, no, they want him because he's at the end of his contract.
Right.
Everybody wants an extension. Everybody wants.
But here's more, Gordon. I said, so it sounds like you want an extension if you're going to be in Houston. He said it's going to have to be something like that. It's a tough situation. When you're doing a rebuild, it's a long-term type thing. Guys have to know this is a long-term plan. If it's a long-term plan for those young guys, then I have to know there's a long-term plan for me too. That's the realness of it. So
yep.
All right.
Honestly, I think it makes sense for everybody, whether it happens before this draft or before the season. I do think the Rockets need to go ahead and cash in that Eric Gordon chip, get a first-round pick, give him a chance to be on a playoff team.
He would have looked.
All right.
He would have been perfectly. he would look perfectly good in either the conference finals or the finals for any of those teams with the way he plays. Like, to your point, he's exactly the kind of guy all these teams should want. It only makes sense for him to be on a contender.
Exactly.
All right. So the fourth pick we just mentioned, the Kings are a bit of a mystery. Number one, they weren't, I don't know if they weren't able to get guys to get in for workouts. They kept it quiet about workouts, or they have some sort of strategy where they were seeing them work out somewhere else. Long story short, they didn't get a whole bunch of guys in for workouts that is known. They definitely did not get Jaden Ivey in, who is probably, if the draft goes as expected, is going to be the highest evaluated player there. Maybe they don't feel that way. Maybe they feel it's Keegan Murray, who some people have them taking, power forward out of Iowa with the fourth pick. But if they take Jaden Ivey, they will be taking a guy who didn't work out for them. They've done this in the past. Last year,
they basically have to do it every year, don't they?
Let me just tell everyone what Jaden Ivey had to say about Sacramento this week when he was asked about it. I would just say I actually haven't been in contact with them. Didn't work out for them. I'm kind of just letting this process handle itself. Here is the killer quote here for Sacramento. If I got drafted there, it wouldn't be the worst option. It's like, okay.
That's very similar to what I said when Wendy asked me about having you on the podcast every week, Bontemps.
You're comparing it to that. Says all you need to say, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this place? It wouldn't be the
wouldn't be the worst option.
I
mean, I could get shipped to Siberia, I guess.
I could be going to Abu Ghraib or Abu Ghraib. I mean, yeah. So the question is, they had to trade Halliburton because they had one too many sort of, I wouldn't say they're undersized, but not tall guards.
Had to trade Halliburton.
Well,
they made the insane decision to trade Halliburton, is the way I would put that.
By the way, it's not an insane decision to trade for a two-time All-Star. Like how long
is that two-time All-Star going to be in Sacramento?
Look, he might get extended this summer, but look, I don't want to relitigate that because we're talking about the draft. I'm just saying, like, you can, and by the way, this is what everybody thinks. Everybody thinks it was a mistake to trade him, but it wasn't like they traded him for nothing. They did trade him for the best player on the Pacers roster, who's young, was under contract, and is a two-time All-Star. Now, I'll stop in front of Bontemps. Bontemps would say, what, Bontemps, about his two-time All-Star? Would say what?
I would say he is a two-time All-Star in what was a down Eastern Conference, and is a guy that if he's your best player, your team stinks.
And the Pacers stunk. But
and
beyond
so did
that,
the Kings after trading for him.
That's right.
And before in their defense, but
they had a logjam at guard, and part of it was that Mitchell does defend, but neither of those guys, Fox and Mitchell do not have size. Neither of them are an ideal two guard. For some reason, they let Bogdanovich walk for nothing.
And by the way, they drafted Mitchell and Halliburton in back-to-back years too in the lottery, like
knowing that they had Fox on the roster.
It's just been the problem with the Halliburton trade. To your point, Brian, like, Sabonis is a fine player, especially if you're just trying to be the 8th seed, which is, as we know, what the Kings are clearly trying to do. Problem with that trade is the same problem that the Kings are in today with everything that's gone on, which is that franchise has not been able to stick to any plan of any sort for more than 2 months at a time. They whipsaw back and forth all over the place. I'm in New York. This has been the Knicks for 20 years, right? For 20 years, the Knicks have whipsawed from one plan to another, made one try to make one short-term fix after another. That's why the team has stunk for 20 years.
They're
the Kings
never
are in a
really
similar boat.
Yeah, they're never really rebuilding because they never you can't commit to rebuilding for months at a time. It is a multi-year process that you have to commit to. And whether it works out for the Rockets or not, they're fully committed. Whether it works out for the Thunder or not, they're fully committed. The Kings will be in rebuild mode, and you can't bounce back and forth from rebuild to win now, because what happens then is you get stuck in purgatory, and it's how long?
16 years.
Their playoff drought can drive. That's how long it's been.
Right. Okay. So what they do, whether they trade the pick, whether they take Ivy to keep or trade, or whether they skip Ivy, we know that there's interest. There's interest from Indiana, we think. There's interest from New York, we think, at picks 6 and 11.
Jaden Ivey also said there's scenarios where I could get to the Knicks, which sort of sums up that at least he thinks there's a possibility of getting traded because he
Right.
ain't going to fall to 11.
That's
Yeah.
right. So he said that, and he may have shown a hand or a little bit there. The Knicks have been tied in some talks to the Pacers for Malcolm Brogdon, which could
Jaden Ivey
theoretically
also a
then be
CAA
there.
guy. Obviously, the Knicks are run by CAA people.
Right. Malcolm Brogdon has been linked both to with the Wizards at 6, at 10, and the Knicks at 11. From what I understand, the Knicks are interested and have had talks there. I don't think they're willing to give the 11th pick. So I don't know if that's something that's going to get
For
done.
Brogdon, you say?
Yeah. The
The
Wizards
Knicks are tied to every point guard that comes up. They got, when the Kyrie stuff comes out, the Knicks are prominently mentioned. With Ivy, obviously, they're prominently mentioned. You mentioned Brogdon.
Jalen Brunson.
Jalen Brunson, although I do expect him to be back in Dallas, and I think you guys have all heard the same type of thing. And then when John Wall, I think eventually it's going to be a buyout situation.
While we've been doing this pod, his opt-in has been officially reported.
Geez.
Yes,
John Wall decided to make $47 million next season instead of signing somewhere for a freaking mid-level. That's a shock.
He may not make 47 million, may take a buyout, but he's going to make a lot.
Yeah, he'll make a buyout for whatever he'll make 47 million. Whether the Rockets have to pay it all or not, it's the question.
That's right.
My point is, I've heard Knicks and the 2 LA teams is potential post buyout destinations for him as well.
A clutch guy to the Lakers. Never, ever, never, ever, ever.
So anyway, the draft in some ways, even though the top players are, the actual exercise of the draft night gets interesting with what happens at the 4th pick. So I would have said, based on my conversations 3-4 weeks ago, that I would have thought maybe 2 of the top 10 picks would move. I don't know what the Kings are going to do. I would say right now it's possible that no picks move.
Ooh, I still think 2 is a pretty good over/under.
Well, it's possible that 2 could be traded for each other.
Yes, and then I think the Kings. Look, the Kings. I expect the Kings to make a win now move for that because
we're talking about Brogdon to Washington and Brogdon to Indiana. I'm sorry, to New York.
Mm-hmm.
Another scenario that I've heard is possibly Brogdon to Sacramento in a partial deal to swap the 4 and 6.
Right.
That would be an interesting move. It would depend on what the draft boards look like, but that would enable Indiana to potentially get off some money and also them to draft Ivy, who is a big local name there, would sell tickets, which they're always interested in doing, and bring in a side a running mate to Halliburton and get Brogdon out of there.
Right. And then
that could happen. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think Portland's also, I don't know if I want to say likely, but certainly a strong possibility to move that pick.
So my latest intel on that, and you may have fresher news than me, but my latest intel on that is Portland is now in the mood to keep that pick. And I think Gavoni had them looking at Shadon Sharp out of Kentucky. He didn't actually play at Kentucky. He hasn't played in 2 years. Yeah. When I had Kevin Pelton on the Hoop Collective podcast this week, he was citing his Nike EYBL numbers, his AAU numbers to do stat analysis. And what else are you going to use? He hasn't played in 2 years.
He's a big time toolsy kid. Like if I was one of these teams somewhere in that middle of the lottery, that's who I'd be looking at. Like he's obviously hasn't played. There's a lot of question marks, but if you have the ability to swing for the fences, he's got massive upside. He's
12 years younger than Dame Lillard. 12 years younger than Dame Lillard. Where Lillard is with, does he want to, is he ready for them to use, their highest pick in years on a, multi-year project guy? I don't know, but I understand what you're saying, McMahon.
Do you want to use that pick to get a legitimate? Again, if they're in win now mode, I don't know if that pick makes sense for them. I think they could utilize that to get. There's the names that they've been connected to for a while. We'll see.
Yeah. So another thing that we're hearing about potential draft night moves is to keep an eye on the Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte has picks 13 and 15. They also have a roster that is very expensive and about to get more expensive with Miles Bridges as a free agent. Bridges is going to be looking for a max contract, whether he can actually get a max, whether it's by signing an offer sheet, because I do think there are teams with cap space who may be willing to give him an offer sheet. Detroit being one of them, possibly San Antonio. Indiana, if they can clear space, might go that route. But Charlotte,
very athletic wings are hard to find.
I can't see Charlotte letting him walk. I can see them trying to play hardball with a max, but I can't see them letting him walk. So they have to prepare for their payroll to go up immediately. And they've never paid the tax, and I think they're going to try to stay out of that. So it wouldn't surprise me. When I say it wouldn't surprise me, this is what people are telling me, that Charlotte's having some conversations about using that pick, either 13 or 15, with one of the players to make a trade that reduces salary. And there's been a number of names floated out on who could be that player. Could it be Terry Rozier? Could it be Gordon Hayward? Let me give you an example. Let's say they took the 13th pick in Gordon Hayward and made an offer for a player like Jeremy Grant. That would lower their payroll slightly, offload the $60 million they owe to Hayward over the next 2 years. I'm not necessarily saying Detroit's doing backflips for Gordon Hayward, but as an example, but they would get Hayward and the 13th pick, and Detroit likes to draft. So they have the 5th pick as well. So I would think, basically talking to league executives, I would be surprised if Charlotte drafts at both 13 and 15. And I would think if they do a move, part of it's going to be to reduce salary Bontemps.
Yeah, certainly. Look, they need to save some money to hire a coach at some point, so that would help. And they need to figure out, like you said, what they're going to do with Miles Bridges. And yeah, look, Michael Jordan's never paid the tax, right? So I would not expect him to be going way into the tax for a team that has flamed out in the play-in tournament each of the past 2 years. And I certainly think those are guys that, if they do decide to try to shop around, like to me, like if I was Detroit, if I could get Gordon Hayward in the 13th pick for Jeremy Grant, I would do that in a heartbeat personally, for where they're at. But that's the kind of deal that I think I could certainly see Charlotte doing. And certainly whoever they get, you would think Charlotte at some point has to find a center to try to help them start to guard people, since they have been terrible.
Maybe they use one pick on a center and one pick off.
For sure.
Yeah, Mark Williams from Duke has been, he's every mock I see, he's going either 13 or 15 to Charlotte, and he makes a ton of sense for them. 7'2", 7'7" wingspan, really athletic. If you want to throw in the Duke ties with it being Carolina, that's fine. So you only need one pick to take him. My favorite Charlotte fake trade at this point is still by far the Hayward and whatever you got to fill it out with to the Lakers and Russ coming back, or Russ going to the Hornets. Hey, to me that does make sense for the Hornets, and it's not because of Russ, but if you're trying to save money, it's a way to dump a contract, and you've got 1 year you got to pay Russ.
They'd be adding a lot of money for this year, though.
Yeah, but you'd be getting off it after that.
They'd only be saving like $12 million. That's the thing, and because Hayward's making 60 and Russ is making 47.
Well, there'd be some salary filler in there, but yeah.
That's the type of trade the Lakers would have to absolutely try to explore into 15 different ways.
100%.
Because Russ's value right now is as an expiring contract, which is what you'd be doing, is offloading salary.
Well, and Russ is right. Like, listen, why don't the Lakers? Why are they sending all this message? Oh, we're going to make it work. Because they can't get rid of them unless they give up at least one or two of their way down the road first round picks they can give up.
They only have two. So they have to go one or both.
That's what I'm saying. Wait, yeah. And so which who knows what those picks might end up being that far down the road, you know, when LeBron is in his 28th year, whatever it'll be. So like if the Lakers could trade Russ without getting off a first round pick, I think they would pounce on it.
If they could trade Russ for 2 rotation players, even if they have to take a third player on as salary balance, so they don't play. If they can get 2 NBA rotation players, you take it. Just guys that you can actually give minutes to that can play with LeBron and probably improve. You would take it. I almost would say no matter the contract, because even if there's not that many god awful contracts and none of them are as potentially bad as Westbrook value to money. There's a number of teams. I was talking to a team in the late lottery this week, and they said everybody behind us, with the exception of like 2 or 3 teams, have called us to move up. So there does seem to be a desire from those teams in the mid-teens to 20s, especially the teams with multiple picks. So you're talking about Houston has multiple picks. Memphis has multiple picks. Does Denver have multiple picks? Somebody told me Denver. Specifically look at Memphis. Memphis is known to move around and move up in the draft. 2 years ago, they moved into the end of the first round to get the 30th pick, to get Des Bane. Ended up being a terrific selection. Last year, they moved up. They did a deal with New Orleans, taking on Eric Bledsoe's contract to move up from 17 to 10 to draft the wing player whose name is Williams, whose name is escaping me at the moment. Ended up being a key player for them down the stretch of the season, I think he was starting for him. Zaire Williams getting starters minutes. I'm pretty sure, unless I'm wrong with man. And so now you hear Memphis, who has, I think, 22 and 29. They also have a couple of extra. I'll just tell you, the word out there is that they're dangling Melton as a possible sweetener to move up. Memphis must have somebody they like. And if they like somebody they like,
tend to do that. They've got 22 and 29. They were thinking and hoping they'd have 11 or 12, but that didn't work out with the Lakers. It certainly worked out well for the Pelicans. Denver does have 21 and 30 being the pick that they got from the Thunder for a future first rounder and JaMychal Green. So that certainly will be interesting.
San Antonio also has 20 and 25.
There you go.
Yeah. San Antonio is another pick. So there's two interesting international players that teams are watching in the mid lottery. One is Dyson Daniels, who is from Australia, played with the G League Ignite this year, and was kind of viewed as like maybe a borderline first round pick during the season. In the second half of the G League season, all of a sudden started shooting up the draft boards as they went through the draft process. He's now viewed as a top 10 pick. People are looking at him for possibly New Orleans at 8. If New Orleans moves out, there's a possibility that somebody could trade up to 8 to try to get him. There's interest in him. And the other international player who has shot up draft boards is, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Ousmane Dieng, who is French, part of the Victor Wembanyama generation, MacMahon, that is going to be taking international basketball by storm, these young French players. He played last season in the Australian League. He, in the Next Stars program in Australia, similar to the way that LaMelo Ball played down there. He played for the New Zealand Breakers, which I think they played their whole season in Australia, though, because of the COVID rules, but I don't know for sure. Anyway, he's a guy, a 6'10" wing, good shooter, highly athletic, only 19 years old.
He is a guy, a playmaker as well.
Yeah, he is a guy who has shot up draft boards, and people are keeping an eye on, like, well, who are the Spurs going to take at 9? Some people think the Spurs are gonna take a big, classic big, but Dyson Daniels and Dieng are two guys that I could see somebody, if they fall to 8, 9, 10, I could see somebody, trying to get up to. The Cleveland Cavs have been rumored to have given a promise to Jang in the hope that he would shut down workouts and people wouldn't discover more of him. I don't think he's going to be there at 14. So the Cavs could maybe even try to get up there.
And
or
one
somebody
thing
could
we
try to
should
jump him.
one thing we should say about him is his projections are very terrible. As far as the stat projections go, Kevin Pelton had him ranked, I think, in the 40s.
Yeah.
He has never shot, I think, over 40% in a season in his career. So this is a very toolsy, high upside guy that could also be a big
By the way,
bust the other way.
I've never heard the term toolsy before, and this is the third time Bontemps has used it. I like it.
You've never heard toolsy?
Never
It's
heard
not,
toolsy.
I did not create anything with that. I can promise you.
Yeah.
It's not-
I
It
would
sounds
find
like
a new
something
thing.
Zach Lowe would say, switchy and toolsy, but I don't think I've heard it before.
I would be interested to, and I'm sure Pelton has considered and studied this, but like how stats for guys who were, in this Next Stars program in the Australian League, how those compare to NCAA or even G League Ignite. Because I mean, these are like they're playing against grown men professionals. And correct me if I'm wrong, LaMelo Ball's numbers, first of all, I didn't play many games, but his numbers weren't great over there. I know RJ Hampton's weren't great. Now Hampton is still kind of in the early developmental stages as far as determining whether he's going to be a legit NBA player or not. But I don't know. I think it is tough to look at NCAA numbers and look at Australian League numbers for guys who are the same age and say they're similar. It's very apples and oranges to me. Pelton would know better than I would, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I was asking an executive, well, why do you think there is so much interest in some of these teams to move up? And he said a couple of reasons. One, as we just went through, there's a number of teams that have multiple picks. And the number of teams that have multiple future picks. We talked a little bit earlier about, the Thunder, all the future picks that they have. I mean, this is what you kind of use them for is to see if you can get from 12 to 7, if there's a guy that you really like. And they think that free agency this year is a little shallow. So if you're a team that is a contender, and a lot of those teams in the back of the draft are, and you don't like your chances to get a rotation player who you maybe need help with out of free agency, and you think that there's one of these guys that you can draft that might actually be in your rotation, you may be more willing to jump up to it. Now, look, I've done this every year, and I hear every year, oh, this team offers this team offers that. And then we go 15 picks when there's not a trade. So there may not be any trades, but there is a real attempt from the teams outside the lottery with multiple picks to move in. Bontemps, what are you going into the draft? You're going to be there, like we said. What is there a player or something you're really looking forward to, or a team, before we wrap up here?
I mean, I am curious to see how these top three guys go. I mean, you mentioned how the odds have changed on Banchero. Is that going to be something that, does he end up with the number one pick? Does he go to Orlando and kind of completely, throw things out of whack? I'm trying to think. The last time there was real uncertainty about the number one pick, and I don't even know if there is necessarily this year, we have to probably go back to Anthony Bennett, right? That's the last time that was truly a what's going to happen with this pick situation. Am I right about that?
I'd have to think on that, but that's not exactly encouraging.
I mean, I think that draft was regarded as kind of a dud draft, and I don't think there was a heck of a lot of excitement. I think there's some significant excitement about these guys.
I was more just talking about like the uncertainty about it. Like generally, you got a pretty good idea.
I don't feel there's that much uncertainty, though. I feel like there's like people trying to inject uncertainty into it now when it's felt pretty cut and dry.
I would agree with that. I more just meant if it continues to trend in a direction where it is uncertain in a couple of days, because generally it's like, who the first pick's going to be. So I'm curious about that. I mean, we talked about Houston earlier, having him and Jalen Green and Şengün all playing together. Ain't gonna be much defense being played if that happens. So I'll be curious to see if it comes together that way. And then just this middle of the lottery throughout all these teams, Sacramento, Detroit, Indiana, Portland, New Orleans, Washington, there's the potential for all those teams to go in a lot of different directions, whether it's trading for a vet, whether it's trying to move up and down. Like, we might not see any picks get traded at all, or we could see 5 or 6 picks move around and teams jump around and do stuff. I'm just very curious to see how that lottery goes, because there's just a lot of there's a lot of teams with different priorities and needs in that group and going in a lot of different directions. And so there's at least the potential for there to be a lot of fireworks, I think, in the draft, which, is always, as neutral observers, it's always more fun when stuff's getting traded and guys are moving around and, players are changing teams and picks are being made. So, that's sort of what I'm curious about. What happens from that 4 to 10 or 12 range, and just how much chaos gets inserted into the proceedings or not.
MacMahon?
No, I agree. The 4 to the end of the lottery to me is going to be fascinating, because not just because of the uncertainty, but I do think there could be some trades there that involve veterans moving around. And so that's really what to me is the most interesting thing about this draft. And then, I'm going to be very curious to see how the top 3 guys, obviously we'll get a little look at those guys, hopefully in Summer League, although Summer League's kind of it's become trendy for guys to be too good to play in that. But I'm curious to see how their careers develop over these next few years.
The NBA draft is vitally important and wildly inexact. These teams spend years, millions. They fight over, hiring scouts. They fight over executives. They claw and scratch for every inch, and there's still stuff that is completely unpredictable and unseen.
Well, the funny thing about the NBA draft, doesn't it seem like picks are more valuable the further out they are? Like, if you can get a 2027, 2028, 2029 pick right now, woo, man, that thing is gold. But hey, what do you think about the number 10 pick in this draft?
It's true. It's crazy. Thank you for watching this Hoop Collective YouTube special. You can hear our podcasts every Tuesday and Friday with these two knuckleheads on Fridays. We will have a free agent special as well, so keep an eye on that here on the ESPN YouTube channel.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus.